Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Found Family. Super excited. I have Laurie here with me. We soul chatted a couple of weeks ago about narcissistic abuse, and she is here again. Today, we are going to be talking about the signs and symptoms of PTSD. So, Laurie is a former federal probation officer with a master in justice, a degree in cultural anthropology, and is also a certified life coach. She is originally from California, but has been an expat for 14 years. And through her work, she shows you how you are your first home through her higher self letter writing technique and customized guided visualizations and affirmations. Laurie, I'm so excited. Welcome back to Found Family. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Lizzie, thanks so much for bringing me back because I only just reached out to you. Was it last week or something?
Yeah.
Asking, would you mind to do this soul chat with me on PTSD since it's PTSD Awareness Month? And you're amazing. You're an angel. You fit us in. So
Oh, you
I
are
just I have
so.
goosebumps on my face because I'm so
I
grateful.
know, me too. No, I absolutely love our soul chats, and it's been so wonderful. Like soul chatting with you on Found Family, chatting with you outside of like the recording, on all the social platforms and everything, and working together on the summit that's coming up. It's just beautiful.
Yes.
So, of
Oh,
course.
I'm so nervous for that one.
And
Oh.
thank you so much for bringing the awareness to me that it's PTSD Awareness Month. I had no idea until you shared it with me. So it's perfect that this is the last Wednesday. Once this airs, this will be the last Wednesday of the month. So it's perfect timing to fit in for, spreading the awareness.
Well, I have to admit, I did not know it was PTSD Awareness Month either until I reached out to you. I think I found out that day or the day before, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is super important because, well, I have PTSD and I didn't know it was PTSD Awareness Month. And June 27th is PTSD Awareness Day.
Okay.
So first, just super grateful there is an awareness day and an awareness month because we were talking a little bit off of this session, off of the podcast about how many people think it's only for certain people, that PTSD is only for certain people. So it really to show that there does need to be this PTSD Awareness Month and Day.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for this soul chat today, I would love to ask a few questions just around PTSD and then dive deeper into your experience and just, get more of the awareness. And so I think a question that some people might be having, although we hear the words PTSD a lot, is what exactly is PTSD?
Yeah, so PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. And what you and I were talking about off of our call today was that there has been this big misnomer in the mental health community or just worldwide, just civilians, just people walking around in the world thinking it's only for war veterans, that people can only have PTSD if they've been in combat, if they've been at war. And I have to share with you, when I was in my 20s, this is exactly what was going around in the mental health community. It was that PTSD is only for people who've been in war. And I remember even when I was an officer that we were told, you might have some people who are war veterans who are on your caseload who have PTSD. But there was never this sort of allowance or permission that it could be for anybody else. And so that is sort of the myth number one, that it's only for war veterans or people who have served like as an officer like myself, who may have seen something really tragic or been part of something really tragic. So the reality of it is anybody can get post-traumatic stress disorder. And generally speaking, it happens if you've been part of an event or you witnessed an event. Or the third way is if you've been somebody who had to pick up the pieces for somebody who has PTSD. So let's say your partner or your spouse or your child has it, and you have been in the house with them, witnessing their insomnia and their nightmares and their flashbacks and their hyper vigilance and hyper arousal, you too now suddenly could possibly have PTSD as well. So that's what it is in a nutshell.
Yeah, I know that was definitely, as we were talking about beforehand, like something that I also believed is that you hear PTSD and you think, oh, well, who aside from people, maybe like police officers, but like you said, like an officer or someone who's gone to combat, gone to war, like done something, seen death and dying. And it's just like, even as we're talking, Tom, like I didn't even consider that like nurses or doctors would experience PTSD because again, I think that affiliation in
Yes.
my mind is like after war, you've got this post-traumatic stress. So it's very interesting to really like become more aware and open up my mind about what it is. And I think that, another question that people might be asking themselves right now, if they're wondering whether or not they have PTSD, is, what does PTSD do to someone?
Yeah. So the first thing I do want to say is I'm not a psychiatrist, and I'm also learning myself because my diagnosis of PTSD only came this year in January. And what's funny about that is the very first time I went and saw a therapist was when I was 18, and I've seen multiple therapists along the way. And I don't know if just my symptoms flew under the radar so much that I was never diagnosed, or if it was just that I appeared so high functioning, because this also can be the case with people, that those symptoms just flew under their radar and the therapist didn't pick up on it, or that the therapist was also operating from that space of, oh, she's not a war veteran, therefore it's not possible to have PTSD, or they're just not trained in trauma. They just don't know about it. So a lot of the signs and symptoms do vary per person, but a lot of the common signs and symptoms are being flooded with memories all of a sudden that maybe you just didn't remember, you suppressed, you repressed. And if there was an event that happened, it could be breaking off with your family, for example, which was the case with me. All of a sudden, I was flooded with hundreds, it felt like thousands of memories every single day while I was in a waking state, as well as when I was sleeping, that I had completely forgotten about. So could be nightmares, could be flashbacks, could be insomnia, could be identity crisis. You're just like, who am I? I don't know who I am anymore. Feeling really disconnected, disengaged. Could be another symptom that you feel numb or apathetic. Again, not engaged in life, this hypervigilance. So one of the things that I definitely suffer with, and I have since I was a little girl, was that jumping and that flinching. So if there was a loud noise or somebody yelling or opening the door and slamming the door really hard, I mean, I would jump to the ceiling. And yeah, when I was growing up, people would make fun of me and laugh. And to me, it was so serious because there wasn't anything I could do about it. And I didn't know why it was happening. And this is a really common one with PTSD. Also, dissociation. So somebody is in the middle of talking to you and you just blank out. You're awake. You can hear possibly the conversation or what they're saying, but you're not present. It's like your head's not connected to your body. And this is exactly what happened with me. So in 2018, like we talked about when I was with you last time during our soul chat, I chose for estrangement with my family. And with that extreme individuation and that no longer enmeshment and infantilizing, I think that's also what brought forward those feelings of identity crisis and numbness. I mean, I was even looking online, am I having a midlife crisis? What is going on? Because I just felt lost, which is really strange because I always have felt like a found person. So all of a sudden, having, I suppose, maybe that psychological umbilical cord permanently cut, that's when all these memories and nightmares flooded me. And I was always a pretty good sleeper. I wasn't sleeping, crying, just outbursts of crying. Also, sometimes the person who has PTSD has extreme rage and irritability and a lot of confusion and brain fog as well. I had all of those symptoms. And the last one that is not oftentimes talked about, so a little bit of a trigger alert for your listeners, is invasive images, intrusive images. I didn't even know what that was. And I'm so grateful for the internet, because as I started to research it, it was like, oh my gosh, this is what's going on. So in my case, again, trigger alert, I'm a big animal lover. I rescue animals. I love animals so much. And my husband would be driving along. This was before my diagnosis, but after the estrangement. And I would just see in my mind's eye these violent images with animals. And it was so bizarre and so creepy and so freaky. I never had that happen in my life. And I literally thought, am I losing my mind? Am I losing my mind? And I think this is common with people who have PTSD. They may feel like they are. And I just want to say, you're not, you're normal, you're okay. It's just basically your brain trying to get your attention that there needs to be some changes here, or it's time to admit that this traumatic event or multiple traumatic events happened in your life. And I had read that people with OCD also can have these intrusive and invasive images.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had talked about OCD as well. Was that something that you also experienced? Because that was something very new for me. I'm very frightening.
Yeah, yeah. So for those who are listening to this podcast, they can't see my head shaking, but if you're watching on YouTube, it's like, oh. So yeah, I'm nodding because as I'm listening to you, and again, not knowing that much about PTSD, not having done research, not knowing what the signs and symptoms are or what it does to someone, I'm sitting here listening and it's like, okay, I can relate to a lot
Mm,
of what you're saying, especially like, the big ones I think that resonated with me is like the disconnection sometimes of, being totally present and
yeah,
having, like there are times where I often blame having bad memory because I am not always like fully present because I'm constantly like
yeah.
my mind is somewhere else sometimes. And so it's been a very deliberate,
Mm,
intentional practice to try to be as mindful as possible that when I'm in the moment,
mm,
and I think honestly, my podcast
yeah,
has really helped me with this because it's helping
mm,
me to really like listen to my guests and like be able to engage in a conversation. Whereas if it was, in a different scenario, like maybe I wouldn't fully know how to like stay attentive. But now it's like I'm teaching myself to be more
yes.
present. So that was a really big one for me. Definitely
Mm,
like the intrusive thoughts. I did like a 5-part series about OCD based on a book that I read that's called Brain Lock. And it's by a
mm,
doctor and it's like proven, you know, self self-care ways to free yourself from OCD. And like one of the biggest things is that your brain is literally on lock because um
mm,
there are like different things in the brain, like the frontal cortex like is
mm,
hyperactive,
yeah.
and like harm OCD is a subset of OCD where if you have, specific images of, you see a knife and you're like, oh my God, could I hurt myself or could I hurt someone else? I've experienced that many times. It's hard to talk about
Yeah.
and admit, because it's a scary thing, but you do sometimes get those like horrible flashes, especially now watching the news. I saw in my
Yeah.
feed that some people have been, very vulnerably sharing that they're watching the news and they've got these horrific graphic images of like them committing
Yes.
horrible crime or doing this horrible thing. And then you wonder, like, am I crazy? Could I do something like this? Is
Yes.
that possible? And it's like the book helps us to realize like it's not me, it's my
Yeah.
like you're
Yeah.
not your thoughts. And so, it's interesting because I was going to ask like what kind of connection or similarity is there between PTSD and OCD, because I have been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder and experience these
Yeah.
things. So I'm like, this is all very interesting because I didn't know that they're similar symptoms.
Yeah, I think that, and again, I'm not a psychiatrist, but what I do know of the two is that there can absolutely be overlap. Or let's say, for example, having grown up with trauma, or even if it was just one traumatic event and it wasn't really processed all the way through, then that person possibly, yes, could develop OCD symptoms, in essence, to be coping with that trauma, with that PTSD, without really even realizing it or without having awareness. And I think it's amazing what you're sharing regarding your experiences with those intrusive, invasive thoughts. And thank you for sharing, because those were some of the same images that I also saw. I had no desire or no feeling to hurt myself or anybody. There was no intention there. And so it is disconnected in that way, that you have no malice and you also have no desire, but there's just that imagery that is happening. And that part sounds so similar with OCD and PTSD, and perhaps that's where there is the overlap. I don't know, but I'm sort of guessing here.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think that's also an indicator or a gauge of like, okay, this is a bit serious now, because in all of my life, like the moment that I left my parents' home when I was 18, I moved pretty far away. And then the first moment that I had the chance to see a therapist, I did. And then my healing journey just continued on from there for so many years, from yoga nidra to yin yoga to past life to rebirth, to all sorts of modalities and traditions that really, I think I was blessed to have discovered so early, because I think I probably was actually keeping PTSD symptoms at bay.
Mm,
I do know that I was now when I look back without ever having been diagnosed back then. But this event, in essence, my final event with my family in 2018, I think that really woke up sort of the sleeping beast inside of PTSD that I had no idea about, especially when those memories started to flood, because the cognitive dissonance was so deep where I was raised and what I was raised with. I was really focusing on all the good stuff, all the good times, all the positive stuff. And when I chose for estrangement and all those horrific memories came out, I'm like, oh my God, I totally forgot about this. Like, and funny enough, I have a really good memory. Like, people are creeped out at how good my memory is. But this stuff, I mean, I must have just really blocked it, huh? Just really blocked it. And it was time. It was time to look at it. It was time to examine it. Like they say, dark night of the ego or dark night of the soul or a spiritual crisis. I
mm,
think, yeah, that was really happening. But you know what, Lizzie? I don't know how you felt when you got your diagnosis with OCD, but I felt such relief. I felt so liberated when the therapist said, you've had trauma, you've had abuse, you have PTSD. I want you to see a specialist. My whole body just, it was like, oh, like massive relaxation and liberation. I didn't feel embarrassed or ashamed or nervous or weirded out at all that I got that diagnosis.
wow, that's so beautiful. So I'm sure you said, like, I literally just felt my body exhaling as you said that,
Oh,
because the word relief is
right.
exactly what came to mind as you said, I'm not sure what your experience was when you were diagnosed, but I felt this way. It was like,
Mm,
as soon as you asked me, like, how did you feel? The instant word that came to mind was relief. Because when I
mm,
went to see my therapist, and I'm grateful that we're talking about this, because as you mentioned, like, I'm a life coach too, and I'm not a licensed therapist, I'm not a psychologist, so those are the disclaimers that, like, are all over
yeah.
my website and everything, that these are um tools and resources for people. But please, the awareness here too is, like, the takeaway message is that if you feel like you're experiencing similar symptoms
Yes.
to PTSD, to OCD, do not self-diagnose, go see a therapist and ask for help, and you will see and feel the same kind of relief, I hope, because I can very much attest, speaking from personal experience, that I thought it was going to be this, um I don't know if it would be like a crippling awareness or something, but it
Yeah.
turned to be the complete opposite, because it gave meaning and purpose to everything that I was experiencing, and it made things make sense.
Yeah.
It's like, finally there was um, this word, like, here's why you've been feeling this way. Here's why you've been having these intrusive thoughts. Here's why. And one thing too that my therapist told me, she said that because of the anxiety and the depression that I was experiencing, I developed OCD as a coping mechanism. So
Yeah.
really, like, with
Mm,
OCD, there is rumination and there are compulsions, which is why it's called obsessive compulsive disorder. And so those compulsions are ways to help tame or manage the stress and the anxiety, because when you feel like stuff are out of your things are out of your control and you seek to get control, you perform these compulsions as a way to minimize the stress and the
yeah.
anxiety. And I had never, and I could never, I'm not a psychologist, I could have never pieced it together in this way, that
Mm,
OCD became a way for me to cope with my anxiety. And so it seems that, again, the very similar um, things between OCD and PTSD is that you have gone through something that made your body
yeah.
just go into complete shock. And it sounded like, from what you were sharing, this fight or flight, that every noise was making you jumpy. And it's like, I constantly was living in this fight or flight as well. And the way
Yeah.
that I felt was like you're on this high alert, and
Yes.
everything was like, I was just highly sensitive to everything,
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
my emotions, but to everyone else's emotions, to everything
Yes.
around me. So
Mm,
again, it all makes sense. It's like
yeah.
the sky's open and you see this beam of light and it's shining directly
Yeah.
on the thing that you need to spend the most amount of time, but learning more about, to set yourself free. And it's this
Mm,
incredible like I'm feeling like my physiology is changing as I'm talking about this, because it really is this incredible relief. So I love that you said that, and thank you for sharing.
Oh, I love what you're sharing. Even me, I'm exhaling again, like, yes. And the other thing that's coming up for me is something along the lines of what you said of, OCD surfaced in order to cope with what you were going through with that hypervigilance, that hyper um, arousal in the home, in with the child rearing. And that is exactly how it felt for me, is like living in a pressure cooker. I have this hypervigilance in the home like you, and this hyper arousal in the home, and being extra sensitive to like what's about to bump off, what's going to happen, who's going to rage right now, who's going to really come from left field. And it's like, whoa, where did that come from? And so as a kid, and as sensitive people, I don't know if that sensitivity was already built in, or it was also nurtured from these situations. Maybe it's a mix of both. But you're on this hyper alert. I was on this hyper alert, and I think that then continues an ongoing trauma reel
Mm,
in the brain. And but at the same time, high functioning can happen as well, because we become ultra empathic and ultra aware of, okay, this person behaves like this, okay, this sets this person off, and you're really sort of mining constantly for the next event.
mm,
And there's a lot of management going on, a lot of emotional management within yourself, but you're also trying to do people management of everybody else. And I definitely know that was my role. I'm the oldest child, and I think oftentimes there's these extra responsibilities that are put on, oftentimes being the oldest child. Not that it's only the oldest child, but just in my case, I can say that. And so I think that, I may have expected that I would have received a diagnosis and felt some shame or some embarrassment or some humiliation. And I really want to say to your listeners that I hope that you don't feel that way. I hope that you can have what Lizzie and I have, is this feeling of relief, liberation, and relaxation, and just a deeper understanding into the psyche of who you are and what you're about, perhaps because of this event or this or multiple experiences that you had, and that there isn't anything wrong with you. In fact, I feel like it's a sort of a sign of intelligence that, OCD popped up for you, PTSD happened for me, because we were really trying to do our best with what we knew, with the tools and the resources that we had. And then finally, at some point, there just is a breaking point. And that was the case with me. And I guess maybe I was grateful over that my tools had worked all of those years, and that I had done so much in the way of higher self work that I didn't feel shame or embarrassment. This is really one of the first times that I've come out to say publicly that I do have PTSD, considering it is such a new diagnosis. But I know back in my 20s and 30s, I would have probably hidden it and felt really vulnerable and really shy, and like, no, I'm not going to say anything. And I feel grateful I don't feel that way today. And I also feel super excited that the story has changed around PTSD, that it can be anybody. It can be a mom going to work at a bank every day. It could be a dad. It could be a child. It doesn't matter where you're from in the world. Anybody can have it. And I feel super grateful that there is an awareness month, that we can let people know it is no longer just war veterans. I don't want to take that away from the war veterans, but there are others too who have it.
Yeah. And I really just want to take a moment to honor you and your vulnerability, and for sharing your beautiful voice, to come out and to share all of this. It is very tough, as we all know, to be vulnerable and to share our experiences. And the beautiful thing about using our voices to bring awareness, to talk about these things, is to help other people, feel less alone, and to give people hope, and to give people hopefully a direction about where they can go next, who they can turn to. And just, and that, of course, as we talked about when we first soul chatted, and what the mission of Found Family is to be this, you know, community of women that support one another, that empower one another, and that, most importantly, help one another realize that you're not alone. Because that was something that, as I was experiencing
Mm,
OCD symptoms, and, people
yeah.
in college would sort of, poke at me by changing little things on my desk to see if I would notice it. And, all these
Oh,
things that, it's I recognize was not, hopefully, like, done with ill intent, but it was sort of
right. Yeah.
because there also was not an awareness about OCD, because people used to,
Yeah.
there still is the stigma about OCD about like, it just means you're super clean and organized. And it's like, there are so
Yeah.
many things beyond it. You're just clean and organized. Like people who have OCD and perform compulsions don't want to perform compulsions. If I could get rid of the compulsions and not have to feel obsessive about performing them, I would give them away in a nice
Yeah.
package, and be like, see them again, but
Yeah.
there is, with the awareness comes a newfound strength, because I actually shared another podcast episode about how I'm grateful, the things that I have chosen to see as positive about OCD, like what OCD has helped me to become resilient, to become strong,
Yeah.
to become self-aware. And so it sounds like a lot of what you're sharing is also this takeaway message that because of the diagnosis, and you are now, sharing your voice and sharing your story, you're helping people to see that they're not alone. You're helping them to understand like what these signs and symptoms are, so that they can go seek help, and then they can feel stronger, more confident, more self-love. And that's really, again, like what this is all about, this beautiful evolution and this growth, um, and knowing that we're all in this together, and that we're all here
Yeah.
together. So there's just, my mind is like swimming with like all of these things, and I feel like I just talked about three topics in one sentence. But it's really just, it's so beautiful to be able to soul chat with you about this, um and helping to spread this message.
And thank you for providing the platform in the first place, because I think that's something that is also really important. I think it's really gutsy and brave that you even created this platform in the first place. And yeah, really honestly, because I don't know if you had this feeling or if anybody else has ever given you this feeling, but also working in the mental health industry and then having OCD, for example, or me having PTSD, I definitely know that I have seen it in social media, or I have experienced it just talking with people in the street, that there is this idea that the people who work in mental health are supposed to be perfect, and that their life is supposed to be amazing, and everything is completely organized, and they know all the answers all the time. And I feel like that's, myth number 2 to bust. It's like, hey guys, we're human too. We're learning along the way. And I'm not so sure where this idea came that we're supposed to have everything 100% in order. So I think that's the other reason why I love this podcast with you, and that you are also so vulnerable and willing to share, because it gives people, just your listeners who may not be in the mental health, they might not be mental health professionals, they just might be listening and interested in mental health. It gives them permission to be like, okay, you know what, I have this issue as well. I can talk about it openly. There's nothing wrong with me. On the flip side of it, people who are working in the mental health industry can also say, and me too, I have this issue as well, and I still work in mental health, and I use my tools, and I use them every day. And I think that is what has really come alive for me since choosing estrangement and being open in public about my situation with PTSD, because it also let me know that even though I have been using these tools for so long, and that I was continuing to go to various therapists around the world, as I've been an expat and living in different countries, that still this diagnosis never came about until this year. And so even people who are psychologists and therapists and have their masters in social work or whatnot can miss these cues as well, can miss these red flags, because we are not perfect. And it's not faulting them at all. It's more like just bringing into awareness a lot of permission around, these things, it might take time before you actually do get the diagnosis that helps you go, and I feel heard, I feel seen, and now I really understand what's going on. And that was my case where I got PTSD diagnosis. It was like, oh my gosh, I wasn't surprised. But I
Right.
was like, yay, I have a name. I know what it is now.
Exactly. And so when it comes to this discovery about learning that you have PTSD, I think a really important question that some of our listeners might be, might be having right now is, how did you connect with the therapist that was able to diagnose this, or sort of what were the steps that you took to
Mhm.
get diagnosed?
Such a great question. So, the summer of 2018 is when I chose to be estranged from my parents. And then, pretty much instantaneously, pretty immediately, I started being flooded with these really awful nightmares. And then it was nightmares and memories. And then maybe, I don't know, a couple months after is when those intrusive, invasive images came. So I started doing all of this research on my own regarding the intrusive and invasive images. I joined estrangement groups to understand more about estrangement. I joined one community called Standalone, which is in the UK, that actually, they are like a scientific organization that studies estrangement. So I was doing all of these things around estrangement, but I wasn't doing anything around PTSD. And my symptoms continued to get worse. And so then I contacted a therapist in the United States. Actually, it's Dr. Susan Forward, who wrote Toxic Parents. She's written a lot of amazing books, but that one is probably one of her most famous. And I did just three therapy sessions with her. And I was like, okay, everything seems to be kind of fine now. I went back to my hypnotherapist that I had worked with for like 10 years. We did some sessions as well. And I was talking every single day with my husband about, these kind of fluctuations in my mood and what was going on, and journaling and journaling. And it wasn't until one day my sleep was I wasn't sleeping. I just wake up at 3 a.m. and just be up for the rest of the day for several months. And finally, my husband said to me, I don't think I can help you anymore. And he actually said, I think you need to see another therapist. I think you need to, I live in the Netherlands. I think you need to see a therapist here. And I said, I think you're right. I agree. And I think maybe also just somebody else saying that, when you have someone, whether it's a friend or a stranger on the street, it's like, I think you need to see a therapist now. It's kind of like, oh, wow, I must really need to go. So I did. I contacted the local doctor's office here, and they have psychologists on site. And Lizzie, I don't know if you have this experience. It was literally the first time I actually had an official intake. All the therapists I had ever seen had never done an intake. It was like, okay, so why are you here? And then we would just start a therapeutic session, but never like a standard canned intake. And he did that with me. And I don't know, I felt so seen, so heard. I also felt like it was legitimate that you're actually going to go over my life history and let's do a life review and then see what's really here, not just start talking to me about some incident today. So I really felt like we were able to look at the original core wound or core wounds and my personal history, not to mention all the therapeutic history. And really, he was able to say, very quickly on, he's like, you've got PTSD, you've had trauma, you've had abuse. And I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So that was my step-by-step journey in answer to your question.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And it sounds like it would be in everyone's best interest to get more than one opinion. And I think that is a pretty like understood and accepted thought, is to, when you see someone, you sort of take all of the things that they're sharing with you based on their expertise, and then to kind of go see like a second opinion. And I think that, being able to have that, and then also, as you said, like going to resources that are specialized in the specific symptoms that you're going through, or
yes, oh my gosh, yes.
because that, just to share, a little bit about like how I found my therapist who helped diagnose me with OCD, was that I was experiencing a lot of ROCD thoughts, and
God, I'm not sure I know what that is.
oh, it's
obsessive compulsive, or
it's actually it's a subset of OCD, because there are many different subsets under the umbrella that is more affiliated with like relationships and sort of
okay.
like OCD around that. And so I was obsessively Googling, as most it's just these questions that you have that seemingly are unanswered questions, and then you try to Google like, what does the perfect relationship look like? Do I actually love this person? Do I this? Do I that? And it's just because of all of the stress and anxiety that I experienced over my lifetime. It was OCD was infiltrating everything. It was like work, relationship, friendship, everything. So
yeah.
I was, I had the light bulb about the potential of OCD when I was Googling symptoms about like nail biting, hair picking, skin picking. And I found out that, like a couple of years ago, but it was more of just like, I think I have this. I don't know. It sounds similar.
Yeah.
But then it was later on when I started experiencing more of like ROCD that I thought, you know what, like I really need to go see someone. So I went to Google and I looked specifically for, therapists and mental health professionals that specialize in OCD. The one that diagnosed me. So it's like using your resources available, and thank God for Google, to sort of
Right?
say, here's what I'm experiencing. I don't know what I have, but here's how I feel. Here's what I'm experiencing. Here's what I, can think,
Yeah.
and sort of, and doing that. And truthfully, I'm very grateful that I found like the person straight away. And so that experience was like very easy for me.
Mm,
But I had
nice.
seen therapists before, and like it didn't really, you know, it came up, but maybe in different ways. And it wasn't really like, I remember that I started seeing a therapist even like as a very young child because I had an eating disorder. And
Mhm.
my mom brought me to someone that, she thought there was sibling rivalry and jealousy. And there was one therapist that gave me Elizabeth's special tape. And I don't remember like what the therapy was about, but I felt like there was something wrong with me. So that
Mm,
was a lot of like, the
yeah.
stigma around like going to see a therapist. Like back in the
Yes.
90s, it was like, oh,
Mm,
you have issues, like you have problems. And as a young child, I was like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. I have a problem.
yeah.
So,
Oh,
I think that another takeaway of like what I'm trying to say and what I know that you're also saying is, don't be ashamed, as you said before, is like, do not be embarrassed, do not be ashamed. There are people on this planet, thankfully, who are here to help us learn how to cope, learn how to manage, diagnose us, give us like, you can't fix some, well, no, not fix us. We're not broken, but you can't address something unless you know what it is. Like in my mind, I was
yeah.
thinking like a house, if like there's a leak and you don't know where it's coming from, and the word fix
Right.
comes to mind. But I take that word back, because that we don't need fixing. As human beings, it's beautiful that we are here to grow, to learn, to evolve. And when there are traumas and things that are outside of our control, that it's like a cause and effect, that things happen to us and we need the support to really like feel relieved. Like really, that's what I found too, was like, I don't need fixing. I need to love myself and to accept
Yeah.
myself. And there were barriers to giving me that permission. Like I didn't feel like I was allowed to love myself, or allowed, because I was imperfect and this and that. So when I
Yeah.
learned how to let go of fear and how to reframe, different things in my life to give myself this permission, like that also has really been helping with the OCD, and minimizes the episodes. I
Yeah.
haven't, I'm very happy to say, thank God, I haven't experienced a panic attack in like a year and a half. I used to be on Xanax because they were so bad.
Yeah.
um, so anyway, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
all of that. But again, thank you for sharing. Please, no, go ahead.
Oh no, my pleasure. No, I sorry, it broke up for a moment there, so I didn't mean to step on your words. I wanted to say something that you addressed. I think that is such a good thing for your listeners, is that it might take time before a diagnosis does come about, and it might take years, unfortunately. And I hope that that isn't the case for your listeners. But I love what you said of you were Googling, in essence, your own symptoms. And I didn't, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, I was always obsessed with self help. And so I was constantly turning toward healing modalities. But maybe if I had sort of dissected that a little bit more and looked at my reading material, there was always a book popping up in my reading material that had something to do with parenting, that had something to do, yeah. And but I wasn't always talking about parenting whenever I went to the therapist. Generally speaking, this kind of sounds like maybe there's a commonality here, Lizzie, with you and me. I was always going to a therapist because of some relationship issue that I was having, or felt I was having, or was worried about having, and wanted to make sure it didn't happen. And where, of course, is that stemming from? It's coming from the relationships within the family from when I was brought up, obviously. So and I had one therapist who did do EMDR with me, which is really a tool that is used with PTSD. And she was doing with me in my 20s, but I didn't know why we were doing it. I didn't know the correlation. So then we really missed the boat there. And I think she had picked up on some of the things that I had said regarding my family. But again, that wasn't the number one reason that I had gone there.
Mm.
And I think she maybe should have trusted her intuition and her instinct a little bit more, and drew the correlation of, we're doing EMDR because of these specific things that you said about your family, and perhaps even use the words trauma and abuse. And then I would have known, okay, well, I'm really here for this reason. So share that with your listeners, because if they're not really sure, also, I feel like I need to go to a therapist, but I'm not really sure why. Look at your reading material, look at what you're journaling about, check out those patterns and those themes. What keeps popping up? Is there anything that you're there avoiding? You know, and with our families, with the cognitive dissonance and like keeping up the appearances and having the perfect family image, it's really hard sometimes to, you can really miss those subtle cues and those nuances, and it can feel so under the radar that you can't put your finger on it. And I think that's oftentimes the challenge, is why PTSD or OCD can be overlooked when we go for a completely what we think is an unrelated thing, and then later on we're diagnosed with OCD or PTSD, for example.
You're so right. And thank you for sharing that, because I can agree with everything, because of, especially because of my personal experience. So I think you're absolutely right. And I know we can, I love soul chatting with you about this. I feel like this episode could be 3 hours long, but I want to be super mindful of people's timing. So thank you to our found family for listening. And I'm hopeful, of course, that, all of this is helping to, show some, pieces of the puzzle that might have been missing, and helping you to kind of see the full picture. So our last question around PTSD is sort of twofold, but what has helped you, or what continues to help you cope and manage? And is PTSD something that can go away?
Yeah, so in answer to the first question, so I actually started looking up about like foods. Were there any foods that could actually help with some of the symptoms? And there's actually a lot of information on this. And I found that eating blueberries and dairy and cheese, not processed cheese like, Velveeta or anything like that, but yeah, true good cheese can help to bring this feeling of calm. So it can also help them, the symptoms to kind of subside. Chamomile tea, eating almonds as well is another one. They have, and green leafy vegetables, they have some components or some properties that help to alleviate the symptoms.
Mm.
Um, Also, I love yoga nidra, which is a form of guided visualization. And this has actually been qualified by many scientists and doctors that it is helping PTSD patients with their symptoms.
Wow.
Another thing that has been, yeah, another thing that has been really helping, and also is the case for me. I use yoga nidra, I eat these foods, but also doing a mantra while meditating. So while your eyes are closed, but also saying a mantra or an image that you feel good about, seeing that over and over again, saying the mantra while you are practicing the meditation. Also just guided meditations and binaural beats. I don't know if you know about them, but they there's a lot of literature right now, especially with like the American Psychological Association, about binaural beats, that they actually change the vibrations and the frequencies in the brain, and they calm them down and sort of like train it with a new frequency, in essence kind of rewiring the brain, and they really reduce the symptoms, make you feel more relaxed. You can even go on YouTube actually and just type in binaural beats, and they have all kinds there. They have different tones and different beats and different sounds that the brain reacts to in a really positive way. Also, yin yoga is really wonderful. It helped me a lot with my PTSD. I do have to sort of give a little disclaimer or a caveat on that. You may become very emotional when you are doing yin if you do have PTSD. If you can work through it and you can continue to do it, from my side, I recommend it. So I just want to prep that could happen, that you have experiences, you're emotional on the map, you might be tired for the rest of the day, but the reason is because the body has to have the release. The body has trapped those emotions and stored it in muscle memory, and that is also reactivating the trauma every time you don't deal with it and don't release it. So it's really good that it is coming out. So those are my big favorites. Future self-work, higher self-work is also wonderful. Journaling is also wonderful. In answer to your second question of, can it go away? This is such a great question. And again, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I've done a lot of research on PTSD, and I find mixed information. I find mixed messages. So I do see in some literature, yes, it can go away. And then in other literature, I see that it says, no, it doesn't go away, but the symptoms just become less and less and far more minimized. So I don't know the answer to that question. I'm like you right now, where I'm sitting in a space of my symptoms have not flared up for quite some time. But I have noticed that can be unexpected strange events that do bring something about. So I was actually writing an article yesterday for PTSD, and I noticed later on, I'm not really feeling myself. I didn't feel irritable, but I just didn't feel myself. So I don't know if it is something that goes away. I think maybe there needs to be more research on it.
Mm. I think that's so fair. And it sounds like there's also this similarity between the PTSD and the OCD, because one thing that I've also learned through this brain lock book, through my therapist, and through researching as well, is that OCD is a chronic illness. It's not something that can go away. It's just, as you said, there are ways in which we learn how to cope and manage to minimize the symptoms, or to best handle certain situations. And so, in a very similar way, even just yesterday, I was experiencing, you know, intrusive thoughts, the OCD.
Mhm.
Like, I know enough now about how my body reacts to certain
Yeah.
things that I hear, see, or think, to recognize now the difference between my voice, my essence, and then the voice of the OCD. And
Yeah.
so the beautiful thing that I can now say, that I clearly was not able to say years ago, is that when I do feel the system, or the symptoms, and
Mhm.
feel my system reacting to those symptoms,
Yeah.
um I remind myself, like, my mantra is, this isn't me, this is my OCD, which is like
Mhm.
what
I
the
love
book
it.
talks about. And so that
Mhm.
helps me to take myself down the ladder. Like, one of the things I used to tell my therapist all the time is, like, I walk myself up all the way to the ladder, and, like, when you hit the top of the ladder and you go down the slide, you hit yourself as you're going down it, because it's a spiral. So she and I would work through walking myself back down the ladder instead of walking all the way up and going down the slide and making things worse. So
Yeah.
it's taken a lot of time and
Yeah.
patience with
Yeah.
myself, just being very mindful that you're human, you are okay, like, you're okay. Um,
Yeah.
these emotions, like feeling stressed, feeling fearful, especially with everything that's happening, is normal. You're
Yeah.
absolutely allowed to feel these things. When it gets to a point that it's unmanageable, or it's hindering your ability to do things, absolutely reach out to someone, get the diagnosis,
Yeah.
learn how to cope, and then on your own, take take those modalities and principles and tools, and continue to do them. It's like the same thing with
Yeah.
working out. You can't you know
Yes.
you can't get fit and feel healthy and be stronger if you do one workout and then that's it.
Yeah.
Like, I've been doing Beachbody workouts for 2 years now, and I just yesterday did, like, day 80 of this 80-day obsession that I did with this fitness trainer, Autumn Calabrese. Love her. She, like, helps change my life. And in that last episode, she said, something that has also been a mantra to me. She's like, this might be day 80, but your journey doesn't stop here. This
Yeah.
is the beginning.
Yeah.
And that thought used to scare me, truthfully, at first, because I thought, oh my God, I'm not an exercise person. I don't want to. I lost 11 pounds and I feel great. Can I just stop? And then,
Yeah.
then when I first finished this program 2 years ago, like, I lost 11 pounds, I gained 7, I plateaued at, whatever, I lost 3, and it was just like this weird jig jag, like,
Yeah.
so what's helped me in the last, like, 6 to 8 months to like remain more in equilibrium, and to, like, it's not about the number on the scale, but it's, I feel better, more enthusiastic,
Yeah.
energetic, all these things. But I now don't see it as this burden either. Like, I don't view working out as this, like, oh my
Yeah.
God, I have to work out again. Can't I just one and done it? Now I'm like, I love that I get to do this, because I'm like, if I don't, I feel sluggish and, like, all these things. So the same physical exercise holds true to the mental exercise. Is that now, if
That's
I
right.
don't say mantras to myself, if I don't help walk myself down the ladder, it's like, I just don't feel this
Yeah.
connectedness with myself, and I miss myself. I'm like, I want to
Yeah.
I want
Mm.
to be close to myself and give myself a hug. It's like, I think that's what I'm trying to say too, is the more
Yeah.
you practice this self-love and this self-care, it's like you're giving yourself a hug every single day.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
really beautiful, and you deserve to hug yourself. So give yourself
Yeah.
love.
I loved what you said, though, too, of how you recognize through the work with this brain lock and your therapist that there's the voice of OCD. In my case, there's the voice of PTSD, and there's the essence, there's the soul, there's you, there's higher self. And when you're really, really clear on the voice, on the energy, and the behaviors, those kind of key behavior indicators of OCD and PTSD and inner critic or whatnot, those voices, that behavior looks totally different than the essence of Lizzie, the essence of Laurie, the essence of your listeners, the soul of your listeners. They're totally, totally different. And being able to recognize that, I feel, is like the first step in the process of moving through and managing the OCD and the PTSD and anything else that anybody else is experiencing. I like to have my higher self talk to PTSD, like, all right, we're gonna have a conversation. This is where we're going. You know, this is how you were trained when you were a kid. And that was one behavioral model that you learned and you needed to learn back then. But we're operating from an even better one now. It's even more amazing now. And this is how it looks. And this is where we're going. And trust me, I got it. We're doing really great. And that really shifts. It shifts the energy. It shifts my behavior back into essence, like you said. I love that you shared that. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, of course. And thank you. This is so beautiful. And like I said before, I mean, we could talk for hours. I love soul chatting with you. You are an absolute joy and pleasure to talk to learn from, to just brainstorm about things. And you've got such a gorgeous energy and heart and spirit. So thank you for sharing everything. Thank you for being so vulnerable with us. Thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for helping to really spread this awareness. And I'm so excited to, share this with the world and help others to, find the same relief that we have been finding. And that is like, my hope is like sending good energy, like sending out all the good vibes and like feeling it coming off me right now. Just like, just from our hearts to your ears.
Those who are watching, here's our hearts.
Yes, here they are. I feel like the Care Bears, like that's like one of the images in my head all the time is I found a GIF of the Care Bears, like doing the Care Bear stare with their the like love coming out of them. And that image is like literally in my head all the time. So I feel like, I don't know. I mean, obviously I can't use that because it's copyright, but I'm like, what an awesome like visual. So like having there, I just,
I'm taking this, I'm using this.
Yeah, I love it. Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing. So Found Family, thank you guys so much for listening. Please share all of your love and support with Laurie. You can find her at lifecoachlaurie.com. All of the links to her social media is going to be in the description of this podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be in the description. So be sure to click below. You can find Laurie on Instagram, on Facebook. She's got a Pinterest. Her website is wonderful. Her blog is there too. So for the articles that she was mentioning, you can find them. Again, it's lifecoachlaurie.com. Any other places? I know you're on LinkedIn as well, so I'll have that for you. But any other directions that you'd like to point our listeners to?
I think that's fantastic. I will just say my name is spelled Laurie. So Life Coach Laurie. And you know what I will add? There is another Laurie Santos. It is Dr. Laurie R. Santos from the Science of Wellbeing. And I am not her. And people, and bless their hearts, they think I am because we look alike. We have similar backgrounds. It's really crazy. We spell our names exactly the same, except for we just have different initials. So I will put that disclaimer out. I'm not Dr. Laurie. She's amazing, but I'm not her.
And actually, I obviously you're on Twitter as well, because that's where we connected. So Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Pinterest, and on her blog. So wonderful. All the links will be there.
Thanks, Lizzie. Yeah, they're all Life Coach Laurie, so that makes it really easy. Laurie. And I'm so grateful that you made time for PTSD Awareness Month. You are awesome.
Oh, thank you. You are too. Thank you so much for spending time with us again.
Yay! I loved it.